Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of Biva Broadcasts. On this epic episode, directors Sam Ambrose and Buddy Deshler are joined by legendary tuba player slash pedagogue David T. Fedderly, formerly of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra and currently the tuba professor at the University of Maryland. They cover everything about Mr. Fedderly's career, as well as a range of other topics and ideologies. Hope you enjoy!
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Biva Broadcasts, and this is episode 10. Joining myself and Buddy Deshler is the legend, the great David Fedderly. David Fedderly is a retired principal tuba from the Baltimore Symphony. He also currently teaches tuba at the University of Maryland and has had other teaching appointments at the Peabody Conservatory and Juilliard, and all over the place. So welcome. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Fedderly. It's great to see you.
Thanks for having me here.
Let's get started. Obviously, I said that you played for the Baltimore Symphony, but there was life around that appointment as well. Was it 31 years? Is that correct?
31.
And actually, Facebook just reminded me today, I'm sure it reminded you as well, that I think it was 6 years ago today you announced your retirement.
I don't know. It was 2014.
Yeah, and I think you played one of your last performances around this time back then too.
I did, and it was really cool because my last performance was with Ben Folds.
Very nice.
What a way to go out.
Absolutely. I mean, my first gig in Baltimore was a quintet at the Inner Harbor, and my last was a concert with Ben. So, it kind of bookended.
Well, so let's start back, and we'll try to get through as much as we can. But before you start going through school, and you, for those who don't know, he attended Northwestern. Before you got into that, what were your first musical interactions, or how'd you get started on your instrument?
Well, I started playing piano when I was in second grade. I was not very good at it. And I did the usual music ear training test in fourth grade. So they said, you should play an instrument. Okay. And I walked in and I said, I want to play drums because my brother played drums. And we had a trap set at home. And Mr. Gray said, no, I already have too many drummers. I said, all right, then I'm going to play trumpet. And he goes, no, I've already got too many trumpet players. I said, okay, then it's trombone or nothing. And he says, you come back on Thursday, I'll have an instrument for you, and you won't have to rent it. And I thought, well, my dad would be happy about that. So I came back, and there was a big, brand new King sousaphone sitting on a Wenger chair. And that was the fifth grade, and that's when it started. So that would have been 1964. By sixth grade, I was already playing in the summers with the high school band. I don't think it was that I was that good. It's just it's a very tiny town in northern Minnesota, and they needed tuba players. So I started playing with the high school, and then once I got into junior high, I was playing with both what was truly a junior high back then, not middle school like we have today. I played in both senior and junior high band. Then I started playing around ninth grade. I played with the Duluth Symphony Youth Orchestra and was doing that. And then, so I got some orchestra experience. There was no orchestra at my high school. It's too small. It's a town of about 3,000 people back then. And my senior year, I got a call that the Duluth Symphony tuba player had resigned or retired, and could I come and play for a year? So I played with the Duluth Symphony for a year. During that time in school, I went to Bemidji Music Camp. Bemidji's a college. And a bunch of people from Chicago were there, including John Painter, who was the director of bands at Northwestern, and Mr. Bainham, who had been the director there. Fred Hemke was the head of admissions at the time, and Winds and Brass. And David McCormick, who became a very, very influential person in my life. And I'm still in touch with David today. He's well into his 90s down in Florida. He heard me play. He was doing the tuba teaching. He heard me play, and he told John Painter, you need to get this kid. and Mr. David had studied with Arnold Jacobs when he was in Chicago, and he said, "You need to go study with Arnold Jacobs." And so I really didn't know who Arnold Jacobs was. I just knew everybody, including Paul Walton, who studied with Arnold Jacobs, had played tuba in the Minnesota Orchestra for 12 or 13 years before Toby Hanks came in for a couple, and then Ross Talbert for a very long tenure. Everybody was telling me I needed to go study with this guy in Chicago. So we were playing in the summer band, and John Painter stopped. He was conducting. We were doing scenes from the Louvre, and he said, first page, he says, "Tuba player, first tuba, can you play that down an octave?" I played it down an octave, so things were very different back then. And he stopped the band again, and he says, "That tuba player doesn't realize it, but he just took his audition for Northwestern and got in." So that was my total audition for Northwestern. There was no audition, basically. And I got in school, got a lot of money because my family didn't have much. And then the first time I saw Northwestern was when I got out of the car to move everything into the dorm room. So, and I found out who Arnold Jacobs was. I was pretty scared to death at my first lesson and many after that. But don't worry, we'll probably have people walking in and out of this office too. So I ended up there. I spent 4 years at Northwestern. I was on band staff in North Shore Band, but I quit because I wasn't practicing enough. And I really started practicing, stayed in Chicago, played in Civic for actually about 5 years until Gordon Peters told Arnold Jacobs I couldn't be in it anymore. But during that time, I was playing extra with Milwaukee, and I started gigging and teaching my sophomore year at Northwestern. And with players you might have heard of, like Gail Williams and Jim Olin and a few other, Charlie Butler and a few other people. So I started gigging right away. And so my first summer out of school, I did a bunch of carpentry work to keep food on the table and the rent paid. Plus I was playing in Civic. Then I got to play with the Chicago Symphony that summer. And then from then on, it was 12, 14 weeks a year playing extra with Chicago, either extra or substitute. I did most of the radio TV commercials in town. So I was very busy. In fact, I took a fairly large pay cut to take the Baltimore Symphony job, but it was a contract. And the year before I got to Baltimore, I played a one-year contract. The tuba player was no longer going to be in St. Louis. So Leonard Slatkin asked for whoever was first call in Chicago to come play for the year. So I did. This fellow named Gene Picorni won the job at that point. Gene was in Utah. Gene and I get along fine. There's no problems, folks. And I won the Baltimore job a little bit later. That was summer of '83 is when I won the job here, and I played from '83 until 2014. And gigged here. There's not a lot of gigging out here, but I've taught. When I was at DePaul, it was in Chicago, I taught at DePaul University and a bunch of other schools, Wheaton College and all of that. I started doing a lot of private teaching here, Catholic University, a lot of the service band players, and then ultimately Peabody. I taught there 11 years, taught 8 years at Juilliard on a one-year temporary replacement after Warren left, and then before Alan came in, and then went back to Peabody and have left again and at UMD now. So that's kind of what I did. Baltimore Brass Company got started in 1992 just because I had a young son, and for all of you who think that the symphony job is the way to go, it didn't pay enough money to pay all my bills and send my son to private school because we lived in Baltimore City. So that's kind of how Baltimore Brass Company started.
Wow. Well, we've all been told that it's really hard to have a career in music, but at least you tried. So it's such incredible stories. Even from the beginning, one of the things that stood out is, because being in Dallas Brass and the founder of the group, Mike Levine, being from Minnesota, we've played in Minnesota quite a bit, and we actually played at Bemidji State and did a master class.
Okay.
So I heard about that, and we were in Duluth last year too, and I actually have a student I'm teaching online that just auditioned for the Duluth Superior Youth Symphony.
Yeah, it's now the Duluth Superior Symphony instead of Duluth. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just crazy to see like the beginnings of everything. But one of the things I guess that is sticking out is just being, a great musician and a very prepared person every step of the way, because you don't know who's necessarily running it, who's in the audience, who are the gatekeepers in particular things, but you just showing up prepared, your part is there, you're flexible, taking things down an octave, which I know is rare in the tuba world, but you're just ready to rock and roll every step of the way. And then that's led you to the next point. And there have been a lot of points.
Well, buddy, I don't know if Michael said anything to you, but Michael and I were at the University of Minnesota Summer Institute together. Now, he was in the orchestra and I was in the band, but I was happy with my position.
Wow. No, he didn't say that. I know that, you know the group and you've worked with the group, and offered a lot. So, you've touched on a lot of performing stuff, especially a lot of the orchestra scene, but you also mentioned your collegiate teaching, but you teach everywhere and you teach anybody about anything. So like you're still super active about as a clinician and everything. And I know that there's been some overlap working with like the Salvation Army programs and the conservatories there. So where do you think this love and just such like a skill in teaching came from?
Well, I always thought I wanted to play professionally from about 7th grade on. I knew that's what I wanted to do. But I also knew how important teaching was. My mother was a secretary at a school, and my teachers were great influences on me. Mr. Gray, Mr. Baseman, Nick Vandesy, who I'm still in touch with, my high school band director. These were huge influences on me. And then, of course, the biggest influence was getting to see learning to meet this guy that I didn't know much about and realize how totally amazing Arnold Jacobs was. And so not only did I take my lessons, but anytime Mr. Jacobs was doing a master class, and later on I started going and doing the master classes, what Brian Fredrickson ended up doing after I left. And Brian did the videotaping and everything, but I was going places. If Mr. Jacobs talked at Michael Reese Hospital, he said, do you want to come help me carry my stuff? So I was with him a lot and all the time on stage, and we were constantly talking about it. And the other thing I did that I evidently was unusual was when I would leave a lesson, I would say, what was he working on with my playing? What's he trying to change in my playing? And what was he having me play to get me to do that? So I saw him work with all of these different instruments. I was a music ed major, so I had to play them. So I got some kind of insight into the craziness that's the trumpet. And and that little thing you put on your face, hard to believe. And so it was that whole immersion. And I started, like I said, I started teaching my sophomore year. And so I had Mr. Jacobs' techniques that were very successful. And when I say teaching, once I got out of Northwestern, I was teaching 30 hours a week privately. Monday was DePaul University and the kids from Evanston High School, where I had done my practice teaching. Tuesday was all day at Arlington High School, which is no longer a high school. Wednesday was Twin Groves Junior High. It was a true junior high. Thursday was Loyola Academy. And Friday was civic sectionals and lessons. And Saturday was anybody who wanted to come in for a lesson from different places. So I was doing a tremendous amount of teaching, so I got a lot of experience that way. It pays much better than delivering pizza. And also, you can practice when the student doesn't show up. You get paid. The only time in your life you get paid for practicing. So that's where it was. Anytime I could see a teacher teach someplace, I would go see that. I paid attention to like Frank Crisafulli's teaching. I knew Vince Chikowitz and Luther Didrikson quite well. They were the trumpet teachers at Northwestern back in the Jurassic period when I was there. So we were lucky to be around some really, really great teachers and have access. Oldberg, Schweikert, and Clevenger were the horn teachers at Northwestern. It just was an amazing time there. And so that's what I got to see. And then you have to hone as a teacher, really figure out your style of teaching. I have a reputation that I have to uphold, but doesn't mean that you're going to teach like me. It's the information you have and how you decide you're going to deliver that. So everybody's different. And I tell students that come and audition, this is what I'm like, and I may not be the right flavor for you. So it's important that students find the right person, because we all have our personalities, and they all come out in our own teaching.
Right. Yeah. And kind of speaking of that, because even in that week that you describe, you're teaching college music majors and middle schoolers and high schoolers. And I've seen you, teach the students at our brass festivals, and you've taught Salvation Army musicians that have been playing for a month or so, or that are starting brand new. So over the years as a teacher and as a pedagogue, what are some of the things that you, I guess, attribute to your teaching style, and maybe how has that adapted over time?
I think my present students find it hard to believe I'm being told I've mellowed quite a bit.
I believe it. I still remember our first lesson.
Oh, I'm sorry. For me, music is hard work. And it's important that people understand that they need to do the work. It doesn't just happen. There's no participation trophies. There's none of that. There's a lot of rejection. And that doesn't mean it's a terrible thing. It just means you got to be, as I tell people, you have to be a better player than anybody else. As a person, as human beings, we are all equal. But as a player, there is a competition, just like an athlete or anything else. One of the things that's important, I think, with teaching is to not take shortcuts. And so you're talking about Salvation Army. What happened is, I teach all the top players there, but I always am put in charge. And we've done Fredericksburg, it's outside of Fredericksburg, the camp is. We've done Denver, North South Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, which I know you've been at, buddy, and also Portland. And I'm always put in charge of starting the kids. These are children at risk, serious problems at home. They don't pay anything to come to these conservatories. This is sometimes the only, in the case of the one you do, that's 4 weeks, I think. 5 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah.
Maybe the only 4 or 5 weeks in the year where they have their own bed to sleep in, a safe environment, 3 meals a day plus snacks, and clean sheets and clean clothes.
Right.
And they come there without knowing anything about music. They can't read music. There's nothing. So the only thing worse than my handwriting is my manuscript. And so because I was having to do it, one year we did 5 weeks in a row at different camps. And I said to Sally, my wife, that we have to create a document that I can just hand out. And that's how Fast Track Band came about. And it's really my way of teaching. How I used to start beginners. And it has, within that first 10 days, if it's only 10 days, they can read music, they know note names, or they know how to look it up, they know rhythms, and they can all play at least 5 notes. Most of them have an octave after 10 days, and they play a concert with 3 pieces. And it's clapping, it's singing, it's buzzing, it's all the stuff we're all supposed to be doing. But people are so busy trying to get them to get a note to come out, instead of, if you have them buzz before they know what they're doing, just a smile, a motorcycle, a frown, whatever, race car, happy birthday, and they'll all be in different keys. And after about 10 minutes of just buzzing, if you play a B flat on the piano and ask them to start happy birthday on that, you'll hear and all of a sudden everybody's on that note, because they've figured out how to make their faces work without ever encumbering them with, you have to do this. And so it's working the theory, it's doing the whole work. And the other thing is if you'll think about beginner books, you usually have to have 3 notes done and by the end of the first page, which means they're never turning the page for months. Now, the reason it works so quickly at Salvation Army, so people know, Buddy knows this, is there's 2 rehearsals a day, so for about an hour each. So the beginners have 2 hours a day, where unlike regular school, like what Sam has, where you see them once a week, Sam, or twice a week for a half hour?
Twice a week for half hour at best. Yeah.
Yes. And so for me, it makes it easier. But I also know somebody who was a fairly new teacher in an elementary school, and they said by Christmas break, the band, because he used Fast Track Band and taught this way and didn't take the shortcuts, was sounding much better, the new band was, than his beginner band the previous year had sounded by the end of the year. So I think getting that discipline and telling them that's not good enough, we're after, good, but let's go here now. Let's try to get this. And challenge and all of these things, singing, tapping, they're not going to fight you on it. They're happy to do it, and that starts to create a lifetime of good habits and a skill set. So I think that's an important thing. And Arnold Jacobs did that. And not only was practicing important, but I remember him saying how important grades were. And so I try to instill that in my students also, that the grades are very, very important, especially for young players trying to get into college. If you don't have good grades, I can't even look at you. And I know that Dan Parentoni can't either. And so school is important, and so is playing.
So we've got some live questions that I think will tie in really well with what you're saying right now. This is from a former student of yours, Dr. Richard White. And so his statement is, Mr. Fedderly is like Midas. He makes every musician shine and is the absolute best at helping individuals develop the best sound and musical statement. How does he know the right prescription regardless of one's level? So how do you know what's going to work well with the Salvation Army kids all the way through, some of your most competitive Juilliard studios?
I think people are the same. They're the same from the standpoint, most of them are there because they want to be. It's very important to them. I never saw Arnold Jacobs turn a student away because he didn't think they were good enough players. We were, just to give you an idea, we were in civic sectional together one time, and Mr. Jacobs said something about, are you boys playing any of the Italian feasts? And the other person in the civic did not pay back then, and there were 2 people in the regular season. And the other person said, I don't play with them because they're beneath my playing level. And Mr. Jacobs looked at the person and said, I always thought that if I was that much better than everybody around me, just think about how I'm raising the quality of this group. And Arnold Jacobs played rodeos, and I mean rodeos, back in Chicago. And he used to play the Marshall Field style shows on bass. And I thought, if he can do that, and it had to do, I saw people that weren't returned because they didn't work hard enough. They didn't want to practice. And so those people tended to not get scheduled. But he would work with anybody. And I think when you start from that, and I don't know how personal I want to get with Richard's. Most people know Richard's story at this point. There was something very, very special about Richard. He'd been an usher. I'd talked to him a lot at the Meyerhoff. I'd really not heard him play until he came to audition for me at Peabody. And I would use the same thing that Mr. Jacobs told me. At your first lesson, the talent was obvious. The development was very low. And I thought, I worked really, really hard, and I knew if Richard worked really, really hard, he could succeed. And that's what you hope for all your students. And you do the very best you can. If you think a student needs a pat on the back, they get a pat on the back. If they need a swift kick someplace in the posterior, that's what you have to do. It just depends on each student. Everybody is different in that standpoint. I don't yell at students, but if I'm really, really tough on some students, they just close up. And I have to be very aware of the personality I'm dealing with. And unfortunately, there are times when I have to crush a particular personality because they think they're fantastic. And Arnold Jacobs used to say, if you want to make changes, you have to knock them off their feet. And it sometimes takes an awful lot to knock some people off their feet. But I think once that's done, you establish this, and then you all take, I'll tell you what, I'll tell you a story. Anybody who has children will understand this. When something happens and you start saying to your child, it's not my fault, it's this and that, and this and that. And I would say to my son, who we had distance dinner with last night in the park, I'd said, the most important day of your life is the day you say, I'm sorry, I screwed up, I'll try not to do that again. And I said, it'll be the happiest day of my life, and it'll be the most important. Well, it finally actually happened. And I started in on him, and he goes, okay, I screwed up, and I'll try not to do it again. I said, good. And he said, that's it? And I said, that's it. You've taken responsibility. And when you can get a student to take responsibility, the job becomes a true joy, because at that point, they want it more, they want it as badly as you wanted it. And that's an important thing. If you're teaching young students, I had a 3 strikes you're out policy when I was teaching young students in the high school, middle, elementary kids. If you don't practice the first week, it's not going to be very pleasant in the lesson. And you'll be told, strike 1. If you don't practice the second time, it will be very unpleasant. And the third strike, I don't yell, I don't get upset, I simply ask you to get up and leave. And it truly is amazing what happens if you're teaching at a school and all of a sudden somebody is let go out of your studio. Everybody else starts working hard, and the people that knew that that other person was a slacker start studying with you because they know that you're actually serious about it. So I think you have to keep quality, and I think that is the big thing that anybody who studied with me. Whatever level you're at, I won't let you perform anything below the level that you can do. And then it's my job to bring it up a little bit each lesson. But I can't have people coming in not playing the very best that they can, whatever that is, because otherwise we're just repeating the same thing.
Right.
And that's probably why I'm tough.
Well, you have so many, successful students and so many students that still are speaking so highly of you. A couple of them have actually tuned in and just wanted to say hello. Mike Miner is saying hello.
What is his rank now?
I'm not sure. He's not delivering pizzas, that's for sure.
No, he's not. He's a fleet band, Navy band.
Dave Saltzman, David Fedderly is the most amazing teacher I've ever had. Lucky to have had time with this man.
David was one of the tougher because he already had a job when he started doing some work with me.
Mm.
And he played, and I remember very clearly saying to him, has anybody told you that they don't like your sound? And the answer was no. And I can tell you that when he had been on sabbatical because Barbara was at the public school of health at Hopkins, and David was doing his master's. I was between the times I was teaching at Peabody. He was with Toby, and he called me when he went back to Honolulu after that sabbatical, and he said we changed his sound, and he said after the break of the first rehearsal, all sorts of string players and woodwind players came up to him and said, "What have you been doing? Because your sound is absolutely amazing." So you have to do, all I can do is what I think is right, whether I'm right or not wrong. It's what I think is right. And if somebody likes that, that's great. If they don't, then there's somebody else out there that would be right for them, I'm sure. And I think that's okay. You have to be true to who you are. If nobody likes you, then you better figure out you're probably doing something wrong. But teachers are not, there are a lot of teachers who are friends with their students. And my feeling is friends can't, if your friends say today, you should be wearing a mask, are you going to wear one? Because your friend said to do it? Probably not. If you want to, you might. But we have to be like parents. And that's why I talked about my students almost being like my son or my daughter. I don't have any daughters. I have a son. Because it is that relationship until they're gone. And then now I would say my son and I are very much friends. But he's 34. And I don't have to be telling him what to do. He does very well. But I think it creates a skill set that no matter what a person does, look at you and Sam. You're piecing things together, but you're very successful at all of the different things that you do because you're applying that same skill set that you learned in lessons. Problem solving, teamwork, just beating your head against the wall until you finally get past that problem, being consistent, all of these things that will make anybody successful no matter what they do.
Absolutely.
And I must tell you, I never take credit for any of my students because I pretty much teach everybody in a lot of ways the same way. Some are successful, some are not. It really has to do with how hard that student works. And so any of my students that have been successful because they work really, really hard and continue to.
Yeah.
So I think that's important.
Absolutely. Another question from Amy Cherry Lowenstein. Mr. Fedderly, I'm interested in working with young children, but have no teaching experience nor music experience. I'm 64 years young and love seeing young people learn. Do you have any suggestions as to how I get involved to begin to teach? I've worked with children who were abused and neglected.
Well, my question is, what does she want to teach? Does she want to teach music? If so, does she play? And what if she plays pretty decently? Bring the kids in and play with them, especially in the younger kids. That will help. It'll, especially with children that have, like the Salvation Army, that often have real concerns for their own safety. And you're asking me what is Salvation Army. You can be honest with them. In fact, I think they appreciate that. And I don't say yes. I make sure I encourage when they do it right, just like any other student. But I think it's important that they learn that somebody can push them, but nothing bad happens to them in that situation. And a lot of them find things that, here's something I can succeed at, when in many times in their lives, they don't feel they're succeeding. I tell the story often because it was the camp where you go, buddy. And we got there and it was a different divisional music director at the time when we started there. And there was, go do the beginners. Okay, cool. He said, but there'd be 2 young females, he said, may not be doing very well today. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, we went up to Louisville to the core church, and they were looking forward to seeing their parents for the first time in 3 weeks. But on Thursday, Mom ran away with the heroin dealer, and Dad's so upset he didn't come to church. So this is what we're dealing with. I mean, most of us are so lucky. A lot of us grew up in tough situations, but not like that. And the one girl had her hair down in her eyes and a hoodie on and her head down all of the time, playing trumpet. We came the 4th week, I think. So it was towards the end. The person had not been able to get more than 3 notes and was very, very frustrated. And I said, by the end of today, I'll have you playing 5 notes. And she didn't believe it. I said, if you'll at least try to do what I'm asking, because she was being told all sorts of things like push hard, do this, tighten your, all of this technical stuff that they got no control over. And mine was buzz faster. Buzz this on your mouthpiece and just a siren. So I knew that she could I knew she could play an octave because the buzz went an octave. By the end of that time, she was playing. This was on Monday. On Thursday, she played solo night there by herself. Hair back, no hoodie, dressed up. And it was a totally different person, both in the smile on the face and in the general carriage of their body. And this is what we do for people with music, because we love music. And this is what I think this person can do, is help people do that. You won't reach everybody. That's one of the reasons I like private teaching. I have a little more chance of reaching most people. With a classroom situation, it can be more difficult. My wife was a high school band director for almost 40 years, very successful. And some people have that knack. I have the one-on-one knack, even though I had an education degree. I don't believe in performance degrees, sorry. Performance degree means one thing: you cannot teach public school. An ed degree like mine means one thing: you can teach public school. One doesn't mean you can't play, and the other means you will play. Has nothing to do with it. I'm the only one that got an ed degree at Northwestern. I'm the only one that got a 52-week season playing job. So it's really up to you. I think Richard talks about that all the time. It's up to you how hard you're going to work and what you're going to do with yourself. So
this actually gets into one of the questions we had live from Wes. Sorry if I pronounced your last name wrong. Kurgsman. Wes is asking, How did you balance your playing, teaching, and retail careers?
You work a lot. During that time, the whole time I played professionally, when I was at Northwestern and before I got into the St. Louis Symphony, I practiced religiously 3 hours a day. I found that once I had a full-time job, 3 hours a day was too much, and I went down to 2 hours a day. And for my entire career, it was 2 hours a day of practice. I could sometimes do 3 if I had a week off, because my favorite composers are Mozart and Haydn. So I had that. The business started in '92, but it was smaller then, and then I ended up getting employees. So it didn't require me to be 8 hours a day, 5-6 days a week there. Teaching, the orchestra schedule is light enough in a lot of times that you can, or the band, even the service bands, are light enough that you have extra time. Say we have a morning rehearsal at 10 and you have a 7 o'clock concert. Well, I could either, or 7 o'clock rehearsal, say with the chorus on a chorus week. I had that whole afternoon, and I could I'd practice in the morning for an hour before I ever had rehearsal. I could practice for an hour. I could go to the store, or I could go teach and then do this, make sure I got all of that in the day. So music is really a 7 to 11 proposition, is how I always felt. At Northwestern, they opened music hall at 7 in the morning. Public safety was there. I was there waiting to go in. Practice an hour before my ear training class at 8. Was always practicing until 11 o'clock. I was a member of the Friday, Saturday night reject club. we would be practicing. I, however, knew that I would get my practicing in by about 9 o'clock and get to the party by 10, and knew nothing really got rocking and rolling until about 10 anyhow. So I got my practicing in. So it just made sure that I had my priorities, whether they were other people's priorities or not. I had my own, and I had to stick true to myself.
Yeah.
So you just work a lot.
You work, but it sounds like, you have, as you said, your priorities, and you have your efficiency with it too. And, you know this, and Sam will know this really, really well. But, when I was at Peabody and I was living with one of your former students, Mike Miner, who gave an update. He's MU3, but he's about to move to Italy.
Oh, cool.
To be there. And correct me when I'm wrong, but I remember Mike would be practicing, but when he had to turn in practice journals and practice logs, he couldn't practice more than a certain amount of hours per day. So rather than it be like, you want to be great, you got to practice 6 hours a day. But you're like, if you're not getting it done in 2 hours or 3 hours a day, then it's not actually as effective. And this also leaves time for all your teaching, all your other playing, all of your other, mentoring and stuff like that.
Yes, and that brings something we kind of chatted about before we went live, and that is the trio and helping injured players. The injuries happen from overuse. And so the reason I have my students do a lesson log, and I never use it as a weapon, and it's not part of a grade or anything else, but sometimes overuse symptoms are the same as underuse symptoms. And if someone's over practicing and that tone starts to thin, they're in trouble. If they're not practicing enough and it's thin, they're not practicing enough. It's a diagnostic tool for me. I pretty much know how much somebody's been practicing, but I'll have students write down they're doing 3 hours a day, and I had one who I had to say, you're doing 5 hours a day. And they kind of looked at me and I said, yeah. I said, you need to stop it. And you also need to take a day completely off, I think, every 2 weeks. I didn't when I was younger, but I think it's very important. The muscles need to not be bashed to pieces, because as you age, stuff starts slowing down in how quickly it recovers muscles and heals. So, and that was part of Mr. Jacobs' whole teaching. There was the whole regular teaching side, but there was the whole rehabilitative side of working with different players and everything, making sure that we got their playing back healthy. And so I'm very aware of that. And that's why I said I didn't have any finesse in my face at concerts if I was practicing 3 hours a week or 3 hours a day after 8 services a week after week. I had nothing. It was like a dead arm for a pitcher. And I realized it was just too much practicing. And of course that took care of that before I had any tears or anything like that. But it's being smart. It's being like an athlete. David Schulman was a board certified physical therapist. Craig Vanderkolk is a plastic surgeon who really specializes in reconstruction of infants' faces and palates. And so he was very aware of this whole area of the face and how to make sure everything is aligned. And so the two of them were working, and the physically people were fine, but they weren't able to play. And that was kind of when somebody who was working with David Schulman said, you need to have Fedderly come in. So I taught somebody in front of David, and the person couldn't get below, it was a trumpet player, could not get below middle C on the piano. And after an hour, they were playing pedalese. And it was just teaching it. And so they did the fixing of the people, and I did the retraining. And what we found is that when people play right, their face is absolutely normalized. The muscles do exactly what they're supposed to. But if people are playing inefficiently and poorly, that all sorts of weird things start happening with the antagonistic muscles, and you get all sorts of isometrics going on in the face. It becomes very hard to play. So that's, I retrained, they rehabbed, and with the three of us doing our own area of expertise, I think we were able to help quite a few people.
Wow, that's very cool. I think it just adds another layer to the multifacetedness that has been and is your career. Kind of going back to this, this might be a good wrap up question, if we will, but throughout all of your career, you've seen the music industry, the teaching industry, and so forth change. It's even now in these very strange times. So what do you find is the line between perseverance and perhaps maybe an unrealistic expectation, whether that be for a student of yours or a professional who seeks you out in some way? Or like, what do players need, whether they're going into school or coming out of school, to really be honest with themselves and assess their where they're at?
Well, the whole honesty thing is very important. And there's an interesting YouTube video of Leon Fleischer, the great pianist. And that's one of the things, is hearing yourself honestly. And I wrote a thing in the Tuba Journal about piecing it together years ago. And I can tell you that weekly, everybody thinks they want that 52-week season job. It's not the thing for everybody. It is a grind. It is a real grind. If that's what you want, you're willing to do that. But there's something a lot more interesting about doing a lot of different things and seeing different people and doing different genres of music. There's something very interesting about that and exciting. I had always said that by age 30, if you do not have a full-time playing job, you're probably not going to get one. And wherever you are at age 35 as a player in what orchestra, that's probably where you'll stay. Now, obviously there are exceptions to that rule, but they are exceptions. And there's nothing more sad than to see a 40-year-old person bring their 2 kids and wife to an audition who doesn't make the cut. And they're putting their whole family's life, when they could be having a great time and then making a lot of money teaching and really enjoying playing, but not full-time. So I don't believe that if you don't play full-time, you're not successful. But I think you have to tape yourself a lot. If you put yourself in situations, and one of the things I say, and this is maybe where I get the reputation I do, you may be the best tuba player, say at UMD at this point. But how do you compare, and luckily I know where those things are, how do you compare to the best player at Juilliard, or the best player at Michigan, or the best player here, or best player there? And then you also have to realize, another student he's in the Air Force, he showed up at Peabody to audition for me, and he was from Texas Tech, from Kevin Wass's studio. Who comes out of Texas Tech? Sorry. And I just said, Lee, I said, I'd love to have you at Peabody, but I said, I can tell you you're going to be competitive for Juilliard this year. And he ended up being the Juilliard player, and then ended up going ultimately to Curtis, and now he's in the Air Force band. So you have to be aware of what the talent is around you. And if there's people who are better than you, it can be pretty hard for you to win a job when there are so few jobs, full-time jobs. And so I think that a lot of people kind of get led down this path. I think teachers need to be honest about what's there and teach students how to go about things. I had one student at Juilliard come in, and he had made the cut for the New Jersey Symphony and everything else, and he said, I don't think this symphony playing thing is for me. And I said, okay, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm playing with this group of all Juilliard students. And we're not doing Dixie, it's not jazz, it's kind of a hybrid, and we're going down to New Orleans to play in 2 weekends. I said, okay, are they paying your expenses? Yes. Are you getting paid beyond that? You getting money? Oh yeah. I said, good, let's go. And that person ended up, until they decided they didn't want to be, on the Colbert Late Show, Yvonne Rubenka. for many years, the tuba player, euphonium player, a few other things he did. He's now doing an acting career out in LA. But it's like you have to be flexible, just like the whole pandemic thing. Sam will tell you that as soon as this started happening, I'm going like, I don't know what this is going to look like, but we're going to make it work, whatever that is. Even if I'm late to getting on Zoom today, we're going to make it work. You know, and it may not be smooth, but we have to be flexible just like we are on the job. And then we can make things work. So I think your question being, you need to be around teachers that will tell you the truth. If you're in a situation where the teacher doesn't want to upset you because they have to keep a certain number of people in the studio, if you're that kind of person that needs that kind of positive reinforcement all the time, great. If you're the person that maybe needs their butt kicked, which is most people, that's not going to be real successful for you. You're going to come out of there with a really great self-esteem and for no reason. So I think you listen to your teacher, you listen to recordings, you listen to other players, and you be honest with yourself. Were there better players than me? Sure. There are people that could play maybe faster, higher, those kinds of things. So what are you going to do? You're going to win your job by being most gorgeous sound and being very, very musical, and somebody can stand sitting next to for 30 years and still wants to talk to you. I was very lucky. Randy Campora and I were together for 30 years and never a cross word. That's a little bit unheard of, but we all had he and I had one goal, and that was to make great music and sound good. That was the whole goal. So I think if you begin to listen to yourself, listen to others, listen to recordings, and try to get an idea of where you are. And Sam will know, I always talk about the stair-step theory. And when there isn't much going on, you're on the riser part. And then when auditions come, you get on to the tread. And then as soon as the audition and everything is over, you get back on this. And the question is, how big a staircase are you willing to build? So if you go, you know what, I'm not playing well enough. And if you pay attention, 9th grade, I was at Kansas University. Thought I was pretty hot stuff in 9th grade. There's this guy named Dean Barnhart who was playing above the staff on an F tuba. What's an F tuba? I didn't even know you could play those notes up there. So that was a real kick in the butt. And then there were other times along where I'd hear somebody go and just shake my head going like, man, I got so far to go. And it's that honesty that drives you forward. It's my wife had she called her string of pearls across her band room. They were sayings. And one of the sayings was, because there was one person that had absolutely no doubt in the quality of their playing. The greater the artist, the greater the doubt. Complete confidence is given to those of the less talented as a consolation prize. So the people that I know that were really successful, there was always that little doubt. And I got to keep getting better. And I think it's healthy. Too much doubt isn't healthy. Too much confident, I don't think, is healthy. Kind of a nice mix.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again for this string of pearls that you've brought about with this chat. I know
that's a nice way of calling it.
One last thing. We just had a question
sure.
pop in, so we'll ask that. We'll wrap up. This comes from Leo Mason. I'm playing again after over 15 years of not playing. I enjoy playing now, and I didn't then. What advice do you have for musicians who stopped playing for years, who are just getting back into it?
Keep enjoying it. That's why you're doing it. Try to get in, if you have a local band that you can get into, or a brass band or something like that, where you can be with people, because music is truly a social experience. It is a team. And I know a lot of people who've retired, they're going like, I'm out 5 nights a week playing with different groups kind of thing. And they absolutely love it. They're having a ball. And being able to have the choice of doing it because you want to versus you have to. And I used to love, even after I was playing a lot with Chicago Symphony and Baltimore Symphony, I would go back, and 30 miles south of my hometown is a town called Two Harbors, which has one of the oldest city bands in the country. And I used to love to go back and play with them. Were they a great band? Absolutely not. But everyone who was there loved playing, and there was such a feeling of, I'm so happy to be here. And it's like, and the academy that the BSO used to have with people who would come in, kind of fantasy camp for orchestra players, was always my favorite week, because those people all reminded me of why I went into music, because I loved it. And that's the trick, is to love it. You know, I still love the teaching, which is why I do it. If I didn't, I wouldn't keep teaching. But I think in his case, just keep practicing so he can get better and help the groups, but get into groups and play and enjoy it. And whether it's a great group or not, it's that experience that you need to have.
Absolutely.
So,
Man,
the joy.
so good. I'm grateful for, you know, being at Peabody, and yes, being a trumpet player, but you know, our my teacher and your friend and someone who's also studied with you, Joe Bergstaller, you know, he required that we all work with you, and just none of this would be, you know, coming to me if I wasn't expected to. And I thank you all for not just this chat, but everything you've done for me, Sam, and every other student that's, you know, come into your lesson room.
It's what we do. We try to help each other. That's what we have to do all the time. So thank you. I love watching all of the people I've worked with and watch their journey. To me, that's the really fun part. Is it's like raising children, and at one point they leave the nest, and you get to watch what happens, what they become, and it's really exciting to see all the different careers, how successful these people all are, and you're the new. I said this to somebody the other day. We're living in South Carolina now. We have a house down there. And somebody wanted me to come in, and I assured them, I said, I am not looking for weekly teaching. I can guarantee you that. You know, I'm happy to come in on a one thing, but don't worry, I'm not out here to get your job. And I said, we're here to help if you ask. And it's fun to watch the new face of music, because people my age, the faces are very wrinkled at this point. It's nice to see some people that we're old, and it's fun to watch this next generation coming along and doing so many fantastic things. And that to me is just a blast to watch that. Speaking of a term out of the 70s.
Well, before we let you go, once again, on behalf of everybody here at BIVA and myself, of course, thank you so much for joining us for this chat and sharing all of your wisdom and thoughts. As a sign-off, this has become a bit of a tradition here on our podcast. We're asking everybody on the calls if they could sign us off with their heartiest mouth trumpet noise. And so just an example of that, it would be a little, or whichever way you choose. Buddy, if you want to give us your best mouth trumpet.
Oh, okay. I've got my little solo in at the end.
Oh, yes. There you have it. Ladies, gentlemen, everybody who could join us today, thank you so much to Mr. David Fedderly. My name is Sam Ambrose, Buddy Deshler here from the Brass Institutes of Virginia, signing off. Tune in tomorrow for another BIVA premiere, which will be dropping at noon. Is that right, Buddy?
Noon Eastern time. Yep.
Noon Eastern. And thanks again. Have a great day, and we'll see you later.
Take care. Thank you.
A huge thank you again to Mr. David Fedderly for his time and joining us on BIVA Broadcasts. What an absolutely awesome episode. If you would like your product or school to be featured on our broadcasts, please reach out to me, Dakota Corbliss, Director of Operations, at dakota@fredbrass.com, and we'll be sure to set it up. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.